afternoon, everyone. Can I first ask, if you've got mobile phones, can you please make sure they're switched off or on silent? Can you remain standing? I have a sad news to impart. Gary Woff died suddenly. Gary was 63. He worked at the Gervaux Centre in Skelton. Met Gary a couple of weeks ago at the Long Service Awards. He had received his 25 years service award at that meeting and then died shortly afterwards. Could I ask everyone just to join me with a minute's silence? Our thoughts, of course, go out to Gary's family and friends. I know that Father Adam will be mentioning him in his prayers. So can you join us now for prayers, please?
Let us pray. God, our merciful Father, hear our prayers and comfort us. Renew our trust in your Son, Jesus Christ, whom you have raised from the dead. Strengthen our Easter faith, that Gary and all who have died in the love of Christ will come to share in the glory of his resurrection, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen.
God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for all those who have served the community and the people of this borough of Redcar and Cleveland in this council over the past 4 years. We pray for those members retiring from public office. We pray for those who are standing for re-election and for those who are standing for election. And we pray for those who shall be elected as members of the new Borough Council. Praying that through their endeavours, our borough may truly be a place where all can flourish. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
May God grant to the living grace, to the departed rest, to the Church, the Queen, the Commonwealth, and to all people unity, peace, and concord, and to us and to all God's servants, life everlasting. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and upon your councils this day. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Our first item of business is to receive apologies for absence. We have down apologies from Councillors Clark, Dowson, Turner, Thrower, Graham Jeffrey and Carol Jeffrey. Are there any other apologies, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have a number of apologies. We'll provide Lucy with a list.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson and Jones.
Okay. Thank you.
And Councillor Lanigan as well from the Independent Group, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Any other apologies? Okay. Thank you. Item 2 is to receive declarations of interest. The form should be going round for members to sign. Item 3, confirm the accuracy of the minutes of our meeting held on the 28th of March. Could I have a proposal,
Yeah,
please?
can I move those minutes, Mr Mayor?
Yeah, have a second.
It's Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll see. All those in favour? Okay, thank you very much. Item 4 is to receive announcements from Mayor and Leader of the Council and Cabinet members. My own announcements are just to say we had a lovely evening here a couple of weeks ago for the Mayor's Community Achievement Awards. So many members of the community being thanked for the contribution they make in so many, many ways in our borough. I'd like to congratulate all those people and groups that were put forward for what they have done, and for all those, to thank all those councillors who turned up on the night and nominated individuals and groups for those awards. As this is the last full council meeting before some date next week, I would like to wish everyone who is standing the very best of luck. Obviously, this is my last full council meeting as mayor. You probably think me very sad, but I've quite enjoyed chairing the council meetings. I've even enjoyed some of the debates. I have tried to be impartial and fair in my chairing, and I hope that has come across. If I've offended or upset anyone, I do apologise, but I do try to stick to the rules for everyone. And lastly, there is an event taking place tonight which is fairly close to me, as it's the Mayor's Charity Ball. It would be fantastic if we could have an early finish. That's not denying members the opportunity to debate and ask questions. Okay. Can I ask the leader if she has any announcements?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I've just got this really, really long set of announcements that I need to make because, you know, it's the last meeting and I feel like I ought to be making some significant comments, but I'm not going to, so I've just got a little bit, actually. But I do think that we cannot let the last meeting of the council go sort of unmarked in terms of what we've all done collectively over the last 4 years, because I think probably every leader in every council who comes to the end of an administration always says that that was probably the most difficult 4 years that they've ever had. But I think as Redcar and Cleveland, there is absolutely no doubt that we have had to deal with some significant hard times over the last 4 years. And I think it's probably just worth reminding ourselves what we've managed to achieve despite that. Only very quickly though, Mr Mayor, I have to say. First of all, I think there's sort of 3 themes around which I want to make my remarks. I mean, the first is obviously been continuing austerity. And, you know, whether we like it or not, that has actually impacted on the services that we provide to local people. And managing that impact has been a key role of everything that we've done in this council. It doesn't matter which political side you're on, that has been part of what we've been doing. £100 million of cuts, over 1,000 job losses. But think about what we've achieved. Frontline services, albeit that they've been reduced and sometimes are costing the public more. We've kept our libraries open and our leisure centres. We've retained our children's centres, and we continue to provide excellent services to older people and to our children despite cost increases and rising demand. And our whole borough doesn't look that bad, does it, when you think about it? Our beaches are probably as clean as they've ever been, thanks to partly what the council does, but also to the contribution of all sorts of community groups out there. And the wildflower planting across the area has been great, and we're investing in our town centres and high streets. I do think that what's been most important about that work, and again, you know, I'm talking about all of us here, is that every single one of us councillors have been part of that work, and that the work that we do in our communities, listening to people, hearing what their issues are and responding to those is absolutely crucial. We do it on a day-to-day basis, and I think it has paid off. But we have suffered some real issues, and this is my second point, and that's the catastrophic job losses that we have seen throughout the last 4 years. I was looking back through some reports, and on the 16th of November 2016, I reported to this council that across the Tees Valley that week, a total of 4,000 jobs had been lost. 4,000. They, of course, included SSI and Bulby in the supply chain, but that was the sort of level that we were dealing with back in 2016. But again, as a council, we've worked really hard to recover. The SSI Task Force, the Employment and Training Hubs, the South Tees Development Corporation, and private investment from some of our big projects like Sirius and the MGT Power Station, and the help that's gone to many, many smaller businesses and startups that are happening right across our borough. So despite the fact that we've had difficulties, we have seen growth, but as we all know, there are still significant issues around job security and sustainability of wage levels, but we're collectively making some progress. And then my final point, Mr. Mayor, because I did say I would be quite quick, is that the third thing that shaped what we're talking about and what we've been doing in this council chamber has been devolution and the changing role of the council. And you know, who could have told us 4 years ago that we would be where we are now in relation to our relationship, much closer relationship with the rest of the Tees Valley through the Tees Valley Combined Authority. The emerging role for the North as a whole, as an organisation and as a political construct, which I think we're going to see more of in the next 4 years. And then, of course, the national picture. We know that we've had now, or we do now have, a Tees Valley Mayor. That local responsibility for economic growth is actually a huge shift, and it will be a significant challenge, as I say, for the next year. The other big challenges that are going to come to whoever takes over after May the 2nd will be the need to raise income locally and to fund local services from residents' incomes, basically. And because we've got a low business rate base and low council tax base, what that means is that people and businesses in Redcar and Cleveland are going to continue to pay more for less unless central government refocuses on redistribution of national resources. And I think collectively, right across this council chamber, whatever party you're in, we should be fighting and arguing for better redistribution of national resources so that this council gets a fairer share of what is available. And I can't finish these remarks without actually saying that, you know, Parliament needs to wake up to the fact that local government needs support, needs focus, needs attention. And that means sorting out Brexit and getting back to working with us rather than working against us, or even worse, ignoring us, which is what's been happening for the last 4 years. And that has to happen sooner rather than later. So I believe that over the last 4 years, we've had a great track record of delivery, one I stand by. I'd like to say a big thank you to Amanda and all the staff here at the council who work so hard to deliver our agenda. We like to think it's us that do it, but actually it's not. It's them that do the work. And also, to reiterate the Mayor, just to say goodbye to those who are not standing again as councillors, and to wish everybody well in the future who isn't standing. Just to say that I think that this has probably been the most challenging 4 years that this borough has ever faced. And I'd like to think that the next 4 might be a little easier. However, I'm not holding my breath on that one. And I think all of us who may or may not come back after May the 2nd are going to have a big task ahead. But thank you all for the work that we've done together. And, you know, hopefully we'll be able to continue it after May the 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Can I ask whether there are any announcements from Cabinet members, please? Okay. Can I now ask the Chief Executive if she has any announcements?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say a few words, as this is the last meeting of this administration, on behalf of the management team and all the staff, to say thank you very much to all of you, our councillors, for all your hard work over the last 4 years. You've been really dedicated, and I hope that you feel that you've managed to do just some of what you set out to do. It's not an easy paper round now in local government. I don't think it ever was, but particularly now. And as the leader says, we've been through a really tough 4 years. But regardless of the challenges, we still need dedicated, public-spirited people to come in and lead and help to shape policies in this council going forward. So thank you very much for what you've done. A lot of members are retiring at next week, and I'd like to thank them for their years of service. But to all the people who are standing for election next week, in a very impartial way, as your returning officer, I'd like to wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are no questions under item 6, so we'll go on to agenda item 7, reports from the Cabinet and Council committees. First report is review of health and safety governance arrangements. Councillor Nassi, you were proposing this. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Craig. In short, this report makes our Personnel and General Purposes Committee a new Employment and Health and Safety Committee. And when this new committee meets, if it is approved today, health and safety items will be considered at separate meetings of the new committee, so that the only item on the agenda when it meets as the Health and Safety Committee, as part of the Employment and Health and Safety Committee, will be health and safety, giving this committee real teeth to tackle health and safety issues. Members will be aware that we used to have a health and safety advisory group, or we still have a health and safety advisory group in the authority, but this A was only ever advisory, as its name suggests, and B was never enshrined in the council's constitution. We want to improve that situation and give health and safety a real focus at Redcar and Cleveland Council amongst the membership. Our officers here do give health and safety the first priority in their roles. We have a joint trade union partnership meeting which the Chief Executive Lead and myself attend alongside trade union members. But there are also meetings with Pauline Kavanagh, our AD for HR, organisational change, and the trade unions. And equally, there are interdepartmental meetings with the trade unions. So our officers are already doing this work, but we as members need to have further oversight, and that's what this new committee is about. The changes do give the committee real teeth, and if you look in agenda item 7A, it lists the people who will attend this new committee, and those officers who will attend include the Chief Executive, Director for Resources, and a representative from each directorate at a senior level, which again, as I've said 2 or 3 times now, gives the committee some real backbone, real teeth to tackle these issues moving forward. Hence, I move the recommendations from Cabinet endorsed by the Governance Committee, as detailed in that agenda item 7A, which you have on your desk as a supplementary piece of paper, to rename our Personnel and General Purposes Committee the new Employment and Health and Safety Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Lassie. Councillor Hannaway, do you want to say anything? Thank you. Okay. Councillor Ray, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through my 12 years as being an elected member, I've got to say I've been being greatly disappointed collectively with the attitude of elected members and, I have to say, officers of this council. In the first instance, it's appalling that the health and safety policy of this council is not written within the Constitution. When was the last time we, collectively elected members, seen a copy of the council's health and safety policy, which is supposed to be produced every 3 years? That's my statute. The hopefully former Health and Safety Advisory Group, over the last 3 years, I think it's only, over the last 2 years, it's only met 3 times. I don't think it's met over the last year. Training. It should be mandatory, like it is in every other business similar to ours and in industry. From your first day at work, you can't get out on to do your job that you've been employed for until you went through at least the basic health and safety training about the company that you work for. I can go back a number of years ago when I was chaired the Health and Safety Advisory Committee, as it was known then. And we had 2 separate training sessions. Out of 59 elected members, 11 turned up at one, 13 turned up at the next one. So as I say, it's a right blasé attitude. Health and safety should be mandatory for all elected members. And that should fit in with the Health and Safety at Work Act 74. Now, okay, you can go back and say, well, that's 74, all those years ago. But since 1974, just about every piece of health and safety legislation within the UK comes under the 74 Act. And we as elected members should be aware of Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, which is the employer's duties, how that fits into Redcar Cleveland Borough Council. Section 7, the employee's duties, and how that fits into the Redcar Cleveland Borough Council. And Section 18, local government. However, hopefully, it is being moved into the governance committee. And while I say I'm always in favour, like any other industry and business, it should be a separate committee. At least we're getting somewhere now. It's been included in the governance committee, albeit it will be a separate part of that committee altogether. Hopefully, whether I'm around to see it or not, after May the 2nd, at least we're making strides forward. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Councillor Glyn Nightingale, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm the only member of the council who actually votes against the delegated power arrangements, so perhaps I have something of a bee in my bonnet about it, but this is a slightly tangential issue. I'd like Councillor Massey to perhaps explain, first of all, and perhaps confirm that this committee will also have the delegated powers that were in existence with the General Purposes Committee. And secondly, would he explain whether the delegated powers will also apply to the health and safety aspect of this committee? Thirdly, would he explain why in paragraph 4 it says that when the committee is not operating as with health and safety matters, it should be sitting as the General Purposes Committee? I mean, that really does seem to me to be quite weird. But maybe there is some constitutional aspect of this. So basically, I'm asking for some clarification on what is actually going to be happening. I'm certainly not against this. I think probably one or two members would have been quite delighted that I didn't realise this, that the previous meeting of the General Purposes Committee actually lasted only 6 minutes, which we ought to be suggesting goes into the Guinness Book of Records for a world record. But I do think we need to have some clarification on the position here. It has been something of an anomaly where we've had this health and safety group and the health and safety powers subsumed under the governance committee. I realise this is perhaps a bit of an esoteric issue, but I think we need to get some sort of fundamental clarification of what is actually going to be happening.
Thank you, Councillor Nightingale. There are no other speakers, so Councillor Massey, can I ask you to sum up, please?
The report in front of us today doesn't seek to make any power changes to the General Purposes Committee that currently sits at the Council. It just seeks to add the functions of what was the Health and Safety Advisory Group to the General Purposes, Personnel and General Purposes Committee. So in that sense, I'm 99% certain that the delegated powers you refer to will stay within the Personnel and General Purposes Committee. I think an important thing to say here is that members wanted, for your second part of your question, members who were consulted about this, so the members on the Health and Safety Advisory Group, including its chair, were very keen to see health and safety issues considered on their own in isolation from other issues. So that, for instance, Councillor Eyre, I think, misspoke earlier on when he said it was getting subsumed into the Governance Committee. It's getting subsumed into the General Purposes Committee. And the reason for that is, like you've just identified, the General Purposes Committee has the smallest agenda of any council committee. It's often quite short, and as such, its membership can deal with these issues, we think, quite easily. But we want to ensure that on the days it's meeting as health and safety, because it's going to get these large list of attendees, including the chief executive, the trade union reps, the directors, we don't want all those people having to sit around to discuss, even if it is only 6 minutes, of general purposes issues. So the idea is to have it sitting as the Health and Safety Committee or sitting as the General Purposes Committee. On Councillor Eyre's point as well, just to respond to him, he's completely right to say that health and safety needs to be engaged with far more at a membership level. And I think that something that myself and he have discussed alongside Sue is that we want to see in the induction programme for anyone who is re-elected or elected after next Thursday, that there will be health and safety training that should be mandatory as far as we can actually compel people to do that. We will, because we think that all members, as we've said in this chamber about safeguarding, all members should be trained in regards to safeguarding as corporate parents, but all members equally should be trained about the health and safety of this authority, and that's something I'm keen on too. But as a final point, I really want to emphasise, as I did earlier, that the operation of health and safety has not been overlooked at this authority. This is about bringing the membership more in line with what's already going on behind the scenes so that we have an overview of what exactly is going on. Members of the Governance Committee in particular will know the hard work that goes on through our Health and Safety Manager, our Audit and Insurance Manager, and gets regular reports. But this is about giving those reports, those people, and our trade unions the right to air issues in a safe space that's an official committee of the council that has some real teeth. So I hope members will support the report.
Councillor Massey did not say whether the health and safety meeting would have delegated powers. That was one of the points I wanted an answer to.
Okay.
I'll get the monitoring officer, who's the assistant director, to answer that question. And a second point, that is not a point of order.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The position, Councillor Nightingale, is that the existing remit of the Personnel and General Purposes Committee remains intact, and we're adding into that the health and safety functions, so the new committee will have all of those functions and associated powers.
Right, thank you. Members have heard the report. Can I ask all those members wishing to accept the report, please show? Okay, that is carried. Thank you very much. Next item is to receive the report on children in our care and child sexual exploitation. Councillor Hanaway, I take it you will be proposing this report?
Yes.
Could
Yes,
I have a
Mr.
seconder,
Mayor.
please?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is the 28th report on children in our care and CSE. Over the 4 years, I've tried to give members an insight into this very complex and difficult area of work, but also in the case of our children in our care, very rewarding area as well. And for this last one, as well as the current numbers of children in care, I've put in the numbers going back to 2014-15 for this time of year, so that members can see the great increase we've had in looked after children since that time. Obviously a very challenging increase, and obviously something is causing that increase. It can't be accounted for by you know, a change in our thresholds or something like that. It's far too big a change. And I've obviously talked about this often in the past, but I'd just like to quote the incoming president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services, Rachel Dickinson, who says that poverty, as we know, can lead to an increased risk of strained family relationships, or worse, domestic abuse, which in turn increase the risk of poor quality parenting, parental mental ill health, and emotional distress. The cumulative impact of these factors affect children's well-being and thus their outcomes and future life chances, all of which translate to rising demand for statutory interventions from children's social care. So that's Rachel Dickinson describing the national situation that we have, and that's very much the case here in Redcar and Cleveland as well. That's increasing our numbers of looked after children, particularly, well, neglect is always a big factor, but more recently domestic abuse is also an increasingly large factor as well. Obviously, we have worked hard to meet this demand, and we're very proud of the achievements that we've managed in the 4 years. So, for example, increasing the number of foster carers from approximately 60 foster caring families to 100. Also, we're very proud of our new retention offer to our social workers and the promotion possibilities that we've provided. Also, we've introduced our new signs of safety model, which is a very different and very highly regarded model of safeguarding and child protection. And also there is our multi-agency hub that we're forming with Middlesbrough Council, and our transition to the Adoption Tees Valley service. As well as the huge demand that we've seen, it's also a subject that I've talked about in the past is the increasing complexity of the cases as well, and the extra work that makes for our staff. So to illustrate that in this report, I asked them to include 3 case studies as well as the usual information about the team and about foster carers and about care leavers. So I've attached a case study to each of the main sections that is relevant to that section. So, for example, on our looked after children's team on page 2, after that I've included a case study, and obviously these studies are heavily anonymized, which we've called the R children. And there were 5 siblings or half siblings there. The 3 elder ones were placed in foster care. The plan for the youngest 2 was adoption. But obviously, as well as our work with these children, the court has a big say, the family court has a big say on what happens to them. And in this case, the court decided that because there was a shortage of adopters, they wouldn't agree it until adopters were identified. But by the time adopters were identified, the elder siblings and the parents challenged the plan, which meant they weren't adopted. So those 2 children had been expecting to be adopted, but then, because the plan was changed, they went into foster care instead. And that had a knock-on effect on their behavior and on their development, which took a long time for them to recover from. Now they're doing very well, now they're thriving, but it just shows there the kind of complexity, and that the system, which is meant to help these children, sometimes hinders their progress. Secondly, the second case study relates to the leaving care service. And this one we've called J. And this is the case study of a young man who had a great deal of loss in his childhood, as you can see in the case study there. And again, so much loss that it affected his behavior as a teenager. He got into a lot of trouble, but eventually was also sexually exploited by an older male, but eventually got through that, is now doing well, is an ambassador for the Borough service, which is a service that provides sexual health advice. And that case study ends with a quote from Jay himself, who says, "I feel my journey through life has been up and down. I've had many barriers and challenges during my time in care and throughout life, but I feel things are finally coming together. My main goals in life are to secure a job, have a nice place to live, and most of all, to be happy." And then the third case study that I've put in relates to our Edge of Care team. And that study is of a baby who was subject to a child protection plan even before they were born. And that with that particular case, the authority worked very hard with the baby's mother to try and improve her parenting skills. And although there is a plan for adoption for that child, the authority is still working with that parent with the hope that the child might stay with his mother. And I just wanted to include those as a further insight into the complexities of the work in children's social care. Obviously, meeting all of this demand has put a huge amount of budget pressures on us as well. And to quote Rachel Dickinson again, she says, "Let's not take any more money away from services designed to support vulnerable children." She says that efficiency will never fund the gap that austerity has created. And there's simply not enough money in the system. She says £2 billion might steady the ship in the coming year for 1 year, and £3 billion from the government might help to kickstart reinvestment in services. That's the national picture. Locally, the budget continues to be a major concern for us, with further increased spending projected for the end of the current financial year. And we're working hard to explore ways of reducing non-essential spend while trying to plan strategically for the future. One of the highest areas of cost is residential placements. And recently we've seen a small decrease in those, which has slightly helped the situation, but further additional spending in the cost of placements with family and friends carers is expected, as well as therapeutic support for children with complex emotional and mental health needs. So the work continues in that area under some considerable strain. In the CSE part of the report, as usual, I've set out the efforts that we're making, and this particular one has some detail about the different subgroups of the Vulnerable, Exploited, Missing and Trafficked Board. Members will have seen high-profile cases connected with CSE in the media, but as with the Prime Minister's recent comment on knife crime, with CSE as well, it's not a problem that society will be able to arrest its way out of. The most important thing is a high level of awareness in the young people themselves, in their parents, in key jobs like taxi drivers, in the nighttime economy, in the health service, in the police, and also adequate safeguarding processes and procedures in every institution, every school, every sports club, and every voluntary group. There is also the increasing use of intelligence mapping in this area, and I think there really needs to be a debate over that.
Could you start to sum up, please, Councillor Holloway?
So I'd like to just finish by saying it's been a great privilege to do this role for 4 years, that I've learned a great deal doing it, and I'd just like to close with a tribute to our staff, particularly the social workers who work on the front line. I think the necessities of confidentiality mean that most people, residents in the borough, councillors and officers will never really know how much we really owe to these workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. Councillor Massey, do you wish to come in and say anything? Thank you. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thank you. It's I think this council actually should thank Craig for the diligence patience and hard work that he's put into his role in this very, very troubled and very traumatic area of council service. He touched, I think, on the issues that I find as well in my side of Seafield House, the issues of confidentiality, the issues of differing interpretations of need within the family units. All those are there, all those are very difficult to handle. There's but one coming to, and something which I'm trying to talk to Victoria Wilson about in a couple of days' time, is none of us in this room know where we will be on Thursday night. None of us know whether we're staying or coming back, apart from those people who are standing down. It is clear that there will be quite a few new members, and I just wonder, Craig, what kind of preparations you're making at the moment to make sure that this particular area that you're responsible for, which is one of the key areas of the council, that we are putting together proper training for incoming members. And I speak in this regard in terms of seeing a Facebook post put up by a candidate, I won't say any more where or who, but who feels that a way of garnering support is to show pictures of youngsters who've obviously got drug problems on the street and telling people to keep away from these people. And I don't think he realizes that if that person is returned to this authority, that person will actually be possibly be responsible in a corporate fashion, that young person. So it's a question, I think, of making sure that we have adequate training throughout the next 4 years. I think the groundwork you've laid will give a good start to that. But I think it's something we all have to bear in mind. And it extends actually across other areas of the council where we are dealing with the personal social services.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to take this opportunity to pass on my thanks to Harry Ainscough, the virtual school head who's leaving the authority, and wish him luck in his next post. He's worked really hard during his time, made a huge difference, and hopefully his successor can continue where he left off. During the last 4 years, we've seen quite a lot of hard work in not only increasing the offer to young people and care leavers, but also to foster carers, which is fantastic. I'm hoping during the next administration we can look at taking that further, whoever's on the council, because until foster carers are awarded the same rights as any other workers within the council, builders, plumbers, electricians who aren't employed by the council and offered things like pension rights, they still feel slightly undervalued regards to everybody else. I think it's going to be challenging coming up, and I'd like to thank Councillor Hannaway for all his support this year as well. Thank you.
Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. The statistics Craig's brought to us today about the number of children in care over the last 4 years actually represents a 63% rise. And as he's reminded us on more than one occasion, 1 in every 100 children in this authority area is actually looked after by its own authority. I think that's a disgrace by any stretch of the imagination. And we know, as Craig has said again, that many of these issues are driven by neglect, family breakdown, and sometimes accompanied by domestic violence. There are now 4 million children living in poverty in this country, and there's more in-work poverty than there are on people that live on benefits. So the Tory mantra of work is the best route out of poverty rings a little hollow. It's not that benefits are too high. It's not that benefits are too high, it's that wages are actually too low. Last week, the three South Bank councillors had a request, as we have had in previous years, from one of the local priests in our ward about the lunchbox project that they run there. That's a project where kids get a free meal, free lunchbox, a bit of activity during the month of August when families can't afford to pay for the kids to be fed properly. Last year, that amounted to 542 lunches that were given out. And it's increased every year since it started 6 years ago. And of course, if we come back, we will be supporting that project again. I'd like to quote from a couple of reports. Briefly, Chair, I don't want to overstep my time. The first of which is from the Tees Valley Chief Executives. It's a report published by the lead Chief Executive, the Chief Executive of Middlesbrough Council, and it was appended to the DPH's report that went to the Health and Wellbeing Board last month in Middlesbrough, and he's quite unequivocal about where the blame lies for the difficulties that many of our children are facing. It's with the so-called austerity programme that the government is running with. His report was one of the most refreshing and honest I've ever read from a chief executive from anywhere, clearly stating what the issue is and who needs to put it right. And some statistics, for instance, comparing the North East to more affluent areas in Surrey and Berkshire, the changes in budgets, in real terms since the Tories came to power, Middlesbrough 36% cut, Redcar and Cleveland similarly 35% cut, Surrey 15% cut, Wokingham, I'm not quite sure where that is, it's down south somewhere, 16%. And as he says in the report, more people are now in receipt of welfare benefits in the Tees Valley and have fallen below the poverty level. The North East has seen a 50% increase in the numbers of children that are looked after, and in Redcar and Stockton over that period of time it's 80%. And just some statistics on police, because these issues are allied. We've got the 5th highest level of crime in the country out of 43. The cut to Cleveland Police since 2010 has been 10%. At the other end of the scale, Surrey has got itself a 1% increase. The other report, which Craig has alluded to, it's the incoming director, Rachel Dickinson, from the Association of Director of Children's Services. Again, she's unequivocal about where she's coming from. And the last time I checked, I don't think the ADCS was a hotbed of socialism. So this is the professional view, I think, on what's going on. She was appointed 2 weeks ago, or are they elected? I'm not sure. But she makes a number of points. I'll just run through the points. She thinks we should have a Secretary of State for Children. Sounds like a very good idea to me. She thinks local authorities should have an unambiguous role in delivering education in their area. Sounds like another good idea to me. She also says we should close the gap in children's outcomes at school by inclusivity, inclusivity in our mainstream schools, particularly where SEND children are concerned. Sounds like a pretty good idea to me. She says there are shocking increases in the number of people excluded from school. We know that because we get them here and we know what it leads to. The use of illegal off-rolling, which means it's a mechanism to fiddle the figures in terms of making the skills look good. She sees that needs to happen. Another good idea. Cuts in youth services. We are seeing a rise in youth crime. Surprise, surprise. She actually expresses surprise. The Prime Minister herself didn't seem to appreciate there's a correlation between what's happening in our communities and rise in youth crime. And of course the Prime Minister's response, and she highlights it here, was to say we need to tell teachers to report on kids that look like they might be involved in knife crime. And if they don't do that, we're going to prosecute them. Well, that's going to be really helpful.
Could I ask you to sum up now, please?
And she deplores
Councillor.
the level of child poverty. The local Tory MP, my final comment, never talks about these things. He seeks to attack those of us that highlight the iniquities of universal credit. So when people go to vote next week, if you want to get more of what you're getting, vote for the Tories. If you don't, vote for somebody that'll do something about it.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Hannaway, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you. Councillor Walsh's points first. Yeah, I think the safeguarding induction is a very important part of the induction for new councillors. I think it's also important to continue these reports at every council meeting and to do everything we can to combat that kind of ignorant action that you describe, which is very unhelpful. And speaking personally, the best training that I had for this role was from the Local Government Association, who do really good leadership essentials courses. I still, the way that taught me to think is something I've used all the way through. Councillor King, thank you for those comments about me and also about Harry. He has done very good work in the short time that he's been here. And thank you also for your ongoing campaign for pensions rights for foster carers. And yes, I think we should look at that in the future, or whoever is here should look at that in the future. Councillor Jeffrey, yes, the 1 in 100 figure, it's actually more now because we've got 27,000 children and young people in the borough, so 270 would be 1 in 100, and we've got 299 currently, which is obviously historically a huge figure for us. Since you've made use, I'll finish on this, since you've made use of the same speech, the excellent speech by the president of the ADCS, and I think this sums up a lot of the points that you were making about poverty, which does have a lot of different aspects to it. And she sums this up, I think, brilliantly by pointing out that it's 50 years since the novel A Kestrel for a Knave was published. And she says, Heinz's novel describes Barnsley surrounded by beautiful countryside, but it also depicts the less than bucolic life of a young working class lad, Billy Casper. And she asks, just how different are things today for a boy like Billy Casper? Probably not very different. She says that Billy sometimes attends a secondary modern school. That would be a comprehensive academy now, although the founding principles of a comprehensive education have not seriously been pursued by any government over the intervening decades. And she says that for a youngster like Billy, who would not be described as academic, school is often a disenfranchising experience. He has aspiration, he has ambitions to train a young kestrel, which means he has to master technical language, he has to master the skills of falconry. But today the curriculum in school is narrowing and focused on academic attainment. There is no GCSE in nature studies for modern day Billy Caspers.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. We've heard the report. Can all members wishing to support the report please show, please? Okay, thank you. That is carried. Item 8 is to receive reports from portfolio holders. We have one from Councillor Walsh.
Thank you. It's falls to me, I think, to give the last portfolio report in the last meeting of this administration, which is a rather piquant occasion. I'd like to echo Craig and thank all the members that I've had to deal with on a one-to-one basis over issues affecting their ward or affecting people who have contacted them. And I just hope that between myself and our officer team that people were satisfied with the way that we try to deal with those responses. It's been a very funny 4 years, very funny for me actually, because as somebody who had been chair of a social service committee in the past, but hadn't been near one for some years, came back to that particular area of work in a very different atmosphere and a very different set of demands and challenges that I knew in the past. This was heightened for me, I suppose, in terms of coming to realise the care pathway that we deal with. By myself, they're becoming part of that from literally every aspect of it, from the NHS, the operating theatre, the respite in a cottage hospital, and the step down to allow me to recuperate, and then of the last few months, living in an independent living setting. And for somebody like myself who's now still coming to terms with the fact that I'm never going to walk again, it's been a fascinating year. It showed me the good things that we and our partners at NHS can do. It also shows the not so good things, and there are some of them. So it gives me, in that sense, I think, a very unique commitment. I think it will be argued that I'm probably one of the few councillors who've left my mark on this council, literally. If you look at the door into Committee Room 2, where there's sort of big scratches on the woodwork, which comes from this beast. And I hope that at the very least, that they can be repaired. I apologise for that now. The report itself is in front of you. It's a very, very long report. And I don't intend to go through every aspect of it, because otherwise you'll be looking for an extension, understanding orders. What I want to do is focus on 2 or 3 areas where I think we've done excellent pioneering work, and then look at the wider scene, and then finish with some political thoughts. And I want to say here and now that political thoughts are political across the spectrum. I think we are working in an area of policy where no party has really grasped the real nettle or understood the real scale and complexity of social care issues. So, I'll pick that up when I come to it. First of all, the good things we've been doing. The first one was obviously the big project, which I'd hoped we could have actually been opening this week, but we're not. And that's the Intermediate Care Centre, the old Hillview Aged Persons Home in Eston. And that will be, as you know, an in-house intermediate care facility with some 40 beds, which will increase their capacity to prevent hospital admissions and enable, on the other side of the hospital spectrum, to enable proper discharge from acute settings in an area where there is not the kind of haggling over leaving the hospital, over taking up bed blocking, and where a person can actually recover their dignity, recover their mobility, recover their well-being. That will actually benefit the health service. It brings some 40 beds out of their orbit, and it will mean that there's increased ability on their part to respond to surges at A&E. The present position is that work on the building is underway. We have appointed an interim manager to run the centre once it's open, and there's a very large sheaf of applications from care staff across the area looking for work there, for the very obvious reason that we will be paying in that centre local authority conditions, local authority wages, and local authority pensions. And that has caused some, I think, concern amongst the registered home owners. So I'm afraid there has to be a so be it attitude for myself. The other part, of course, of that centre is it won't just be staffed by our own people. It will also be staffed by NHS providers. It will be staffed by physios, by people who have special expertise in areas like hearing disability, blindness, visual aids, and other matters. And again, it means it's a multidisciplinary approach between our social work staff, our care staff, and NHS staff. And again, I think that's a model for Teesside. The next area is where people do not go to that centre, is to actually expand our own in-house recovery and support team to help more people in their homes recover after illness. And those teams are now in place. They've been working with people discharged from hospital, and we look forward, I think, to seeing the results of that work in terms of outcomes and in terms of satisfaction later. The next area, again, it's very much the same theme, very close to home for me, is the extra care housing, where with the support of what we now call beyond housing, we are now offering independent living for people who are not judged to be suitable for residential care. but who do need care on the premises. And so far we've got 3 of those centres. We've got the Shore at Spencerbeck, which deals primarily, in fact totally, with people with learning disability and learning difficulties, for 15 units, and I think it's fully occupied now. There is the, with another social care provider, the 13 group, we've made an extension of Barnaby Grange, again, a very good, very well designed and open unit, again with care on the site with 24-hour provision. There is the unit I live in, the Dunes, which is again interesting because I see this day in, day out. And I can see the good side of the building, the good side of the work. I can also see the side which I think needs improvement, and which, you know, I've certainly passed on to Victoria in terms of the review of our work around independent living. But it is an area which is going to grow. We opened the third centre, again with Beyond Housing in Broughton, the Cliffs, and that's bungalow accommodation primarily for families where there are aspects of ageing or disability. Beyond Housing are looking at extra sites. I've suggested a couple in East Cleveland, and one of those sites I know is being actively evaluated in terms of work with the developer, the landowner, and the other one is being looked at in terms of Beyond Housing's own development on their own estate basis in Loftus. Leaving supported housing, we move to, again, looking to how that can be developed in the future. Because if we go back to the big beast behind us, which is the increased demography and aging, we know that we're going to be more and more of this form of housing. And we have done what's called supported housing needs assessment, which gives us some very, very good background on what people expect of supported housing, what people think is going to be needed in the future. And that's led to the ability, I think, to formulate with the housing associations a long-term plan for development. We also recognise the valuable work of care staff, and I've got to say that my heart goes out to them because of the kind of work that's being done in a rush, under pressure, on time schedules, often for little more than the minimum wage, is something we should be proud of. But also at the same time, we do know that there's a need for extra proper training for care staff, which is why we developed the Redcar and Cleveland Care Academy.
Could you start to sum up, please, Councillor Walsh?
Well, I'll say the Care Academy is there, people should visit it. It's worth seeing. I'll move then, Chair. Didn't expect that. I'll have to move then to leave this wishes at the back. And what I'll say there is very simple. There is a looming crisis in social care based on numbers of people who will be requiring it now and in the future. The level of that and demand for that social care and its nature, with more people growing to an older age, you know, the growth of Alzheimer's. We have the issues of funding, which is inadequate, and we have the issues around government support and relationship with the NHS. All governments, frankly, have shied away because at some point we've got to face the spectre of how you deal with paying for social care. Obviously, I want to see it based on the same model as the NHS, which is free at the point of demand. That is going to be a very, very expensive structure to bring about. I think it's the only model we can adopt. I know there's resistance out there to tax increases, but we've got to recognise that it's your mother, it's your grandmother, it's your brother who may be in an accident. People like that. Just our community needs to actually do far more for our people, and I hope that certainly when we go into the next general election, we'll have proper costings for all the parties, but beyond proper costings, some evaluation and policy on what needs to be built on over the next 10 to 20 years. We need a beverage report for social care. We haven't had one in the past. We need one now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Evans, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've seen the problems with funding from health and social care, and particularly over continuing health care. And it's been a regular theme all the while I've been on the council, not just in the past 4 years, but perhaps increasingly so. It's good to see acknowledgement of the shortcomings of various plans from successive governments. And at the end of it all, somebody's going to have to dig deep into their pockets to find this solution. So whoever takes on the role in the next council, I'd like to wish them well. I think it's going to be a long, hard road ahead. However, I do feel that, particularly with the Intermediate Care Centre and all the new build we've had for interim care, the council have made the best efforts to sort of plug the gaps and to work with the NHS. You just occasionally get a feeling that it's not always so much of a two-way process, but I'd like to think it was, because till we get that holistic approach, we're sometimes vying with each other over scant resources. Finally, I'd like to thank the officers who accompany us on our visits to our various care homes, some of them very small and some of them much larger establishments. I think it shows out there, alongside the people who do domiciliary visits, that we have a very caring workforce and we do our very best to meet the needs of some of our most vulnerable residents. So I'd like to thank everyone who works in this sector and gives so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I forgot to say it was a question and answer session. I don't know whether you had a question in there. Okay, it was more of a comment. Okay. Yeah. It is a question and answer session, so can I ask if you could make your questions succinct and to the point, please? Okay, that's okay. Councillor Davis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm just reading the report, Councillor Walsh, on dementia-friendly borough. I don't know if you're aware, but Liverton Mines is pretty much one step away from being the first dementia-friendly village in Redcar and Cleveland. I think they've got one more business to sign up, and they will be the first in the borough. So I want to give my thanks to Liverton Mines residents and businesses for getting involved in and really taking this by the clutch, really. And also to Sharon Chappell, I think she works for the Borough Council. You wouldn't think it, because she seems to be involved with absolutely everything in the area at the moment. And the parish councillor for Liverton Mines, Rob Cottle, who's also been one of the main people sort of involved with that. And I know you touched on the supported housing needs assessment. As you know, that Loftus was one of these places that was earmarked for one of these sites up on the old Westfield site that never came about. So I hope that's something that will, whoever takes over, or if you're still here, obviously if you take it up, it's something that is earmarked early next year for consideration. And Mary, Councillor Evans mentioned rota visits, and I just wanted to pick up on that as well, because I believe there's only nine of us that are registered to undertake rota visits in this borough council out of 59 councillors. I think it works out at around, if every councillor was involved in it, it would be one rota visit each per year, and at the moment them 9 are cutting the slack for everybody else. And I hope that after the elections, whoever comes back, people get involved with it. It takes 1 or 2 hours out of your life for a year, and it's quite endearing, I think, to go around and see some of the people who've contributed to our towns and villages, and find out what they're up to. Sometimes just having that little conversation is absolutely key to some of them. And one of them in particular I'll just mention was I grew up in Liverton Mines, and she was a resident in Liverton Mines, an elderly resident, and she's got dementia now, and she still remembered my face from Liverton Mines, and she asked me if I was going to the park. So, and she lives on the corner, and that was absolutely brilliant for me. I absolutely loved it. So I would urge everyone after May, if you're here, to get involved with that. It might just change your perspective on a lot of things. And rotor visit doesn't sound as though it's a job. You know, when you actually get there, it's quite interesting. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davis. I don't know whether, again, was there a question in there?
Question from that.
Councillor Walsh, you want to respond to that?
There's another one over there.
Okay.
Well, if you want me to respond, I thought you might be taking Councillor Nightingale. But I'll respond. I think in Mary's case, totally agree, and it will be a hard job for anybody who's coming in. I think the one issue, regardless of who's here and what party is running the authority, is to lobby both the MPs of this area to try and do their best in social care. There was a debate, I've got to say, I will be political now. There was a debate on social care in the House of Commons yesterday afternoon. And I actually watched it because Anna Turley wanted to speak. We'd helped her with a bit of the speech on facts and figures. And she managed to get in about 3 o'clock. And in that view, they do the long view of the chamber, there was a absolutely empty government side, 4 or 5 backbenchers, 2 or 3 PPSs, and a ministerial team at the front. But opposite them was an absolutely serried rank of Labour MPs, a large number of Lib Dem MPs, and to their credit, some SNP MPs didn't have to necessarily engage in it because they have their own structures in Scotland. But it just exposed the fact that I think that and I have to say on one side of the House of Commons there is disinterest. On the House side there is interest, but again it is limited in terms of people doing the kind of work on structures and funding for the future. And that's again I think where our party fails. Going back to Wayne's question, yes, I think Westfield should be one of the sites. I've stressed it to both Ian Sim and to Tracy O'Neill fairly constantly over the past months. They have been looking at it. It's a question of working with a care agency, and a question of working with ourselves, and it's a question of looking at the costs. And there's one other site in East Cleveland they're looking at. But of course, obviously, I think one issue with One Housing is going to be that now they're merged with Yorkshire Coast Housing, which as far as I know hasn't done anything like this. So I think they're going to have to be doing some work in the Scarborough area as well, and that might impact on us. But I think we'll keep fighting the case for Loftus, certainly. And by the way, on the dementia friendly, yeah, I was going to mention the dementia issue. If I hadn't had to jump the report, I'd recommend anybody, if they got the ability to hear the presentation that the guy from the Alzheimer's Society makes. We had him at, I think he was booked by the chair of adult scrutiny some time ago to do the adult scrutiny session. He did an absolutely marvellous session in that committee, and it should be one that's extended elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Nightingale, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, obviously, it would be impossible not to be sympathetic to the aspirations and efforts of the social services staff, and also to recognise the complexity of modern society and the complexity of a lot of the work that they do. And I think that Councillor Walsh provided us with a very comprehensive report. But there is one aspect of this that I always find difficult to grasp. And while I support as well and would sympathise with many of the points that he makes in the concluding parts of his analysis of what needs to be done, I think there is something missing here. And it would be very useful if we could actually see the dimensions of the problem and the problems facing people in this borough. If we could have figures for the number of people who are involved in each of the separate projects that are mentioned here, then we can get some sort of picture. I mean, in the case of Councillor Hanaway's report, he does actually say the number of children are involved. But in this report, we don't know. And so, would he provide perhaps in the future, there's the question, would he provide perhaps in the future the statistics of the people who are actually involved in many of these projects? Because you know, as I say, I don't think anybody here will be unsympathetic to efforts to make sure that these people do have a better life. And it is part of our job to ensure that the quality of life that people have in this borough is enhanced. But it would help us get some sort of picture of the issues involved. Thank you.
Councillor Nightingale?
Yeah, I mean, I take the point. It's one really that, on reflection, is self-obvious. Well, I'm seeing, as I said, I'm seeing Victoria on Monday, so that's something I will raise with her for the future report, whoever presents it. And in terms of development in the future and the challenge that we face, I think the real problem actually at heart is that all parties are having to face a population that is resistant to having to fork out for unnecessary need. And it seems to be across the spectrum, it's across the political spectrum, it's across the age spectrum. There is a reluctance. And I think, you know, as I say, I had to quote Bertolt Brecht. It's probably the first time we've had him quoted in this room, where he said, the population, my population was the German population. They have failed us. We need a new German population. And perhaps we do that in this country, I don't know. But certainly that resistance is there. I find it very, very, very difficult to understand.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. We don't have any items under 9. There are no members to appoint. There are no questions from members of the council. That brings us to the end of the agenda. Can I just... Sorry, Councillor Foggo.
Today, some of us might not be here at the next council meeting. So I would just like to propose a vote of thanks to our Mayor, who I think has done a great job over the last year. He's carried out his duties with devotion and hard work, and just like to record our good wishes for the future.
Thank you very much, Councillor Foggo.
Mr. Mayor, I wonder if I might just, I wasn't going to speak today, but I thought you'd probably all like one last chance to hear my dulcet tones. And really all I wanted to do was echo the words of the leader at the start of our meeting this afternoon in saying a huge thank you to all of our council officers, who I feel that in the last year, 4 years, 8 years, 9 years of adversity actually have continued to deliver extraordinary local services. It's been incredibly difficult. It may get more difficult, but I know that they will continue to do their very best to deliver for the people of Redcar and Cleveland. And of course, I'd like to thank all of you with whom it has been a pleasure to serve, with some of you for the last 8 years, and all of you for the last 4 years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Over and out.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. The Deputy Mayor, please.
Yes, well, I too thought I was going to say nothing today, but I'm quite pleased. I don't really like to go through a meeting saying nothing, but and I'm glad Josh had the word, because I did say that he was the best speaker that this council had ever had, and so it would be a pity not to have heard from him today. But can I endorse what has been said about the Mayor? I've been deputising for him through the year. It's been a pleasure to work with him and for him and to deputise for him. And you know, I would just like to thank him for his support. We worked together well when I was a member and Dennis was an officer in the housing department. And I think we've just continued that tradition of working together. Now, I don't normally go to the charity ball, but I've made as deputy, I thought I had a duty this time to go, and I will be there this evening. It's certainly been a very long day. I was electioneering this morning, so I'm feeling quite tired. So can I also thank the whole council? I've enjoyed, you know, those who won't be coming back, perhaps I won't be coming back, but it's been a pleasure to work with you all. I think we work together with greater cooperation between the groups than we used to do, and I think this has been for the good of the council. I also think rather than getting too emotional, we're using reason a bit more, which is always a good idea, and for that reason we've been able to deliver the successes which Sue outlined at the beginning, despite the adversity we have been up against. So thank you all very much, and particularly the Mayor, Dennis Teasdale.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Before I do close on a personal item, when I was elected 4 years ago, I knew some members of the council, but I've been very grateful for the relationship that has been built up across all parties in those 4 years, and the support and the advice I've been given by existing members of the council who advised me, not just from my own party, but people like Sue Jeffrey, who we go back for many, many years. I won't say how many, I won't embarrass her. But for the advice and support that I've had, and in particular this last year, which I must admit, my wife and I have thoroughly enjoyed, and I was quite serious when I said I have quite enjoyed chairing the meetings of the council and the debates that we've had. And I'd like to thank everyone across the council for the support, the advice and the friendship that I've had in these last 4 years. I hope I might be back to enjoy it, but who knows. Thank you very much indeed. I will now officially close the meeting.